Good evening, everyone. Welcome to another great event here at Freelancers Hub. As always, I am Jalen Vazquez, the director of the Hub. Welcome to tonight's event, Cooperatives, Opportunities for Collective Ownership. It's going to be a fireside chat between very special guest of ours, Mr. Jason Wiener, who's I'm going to give his own intro because he's got a lot about him, but he's pretty much here to help us learn more about workers, co-ops, and pretty much anything and everything in between. If you do have any questions, write in the chats. But before I do bring him on, we do have a special word from our executive director, Mr. Rafael Espinal.
Thanks, Jalen, and hello, everyone, and welcome, and thank you for joining us on today's webinar. Here at Freelancers Union, as you all know, we know that you often face unique challenges when it comes to finding affordable benefits, reliable services, and opportunities to build community. And it is what we strive to do as an organization, and that is why this topic is so intriguing to me and us all. It's all about how freelancers can come together to create systems that are truly for, of, and by freelancers. Cooperatives offer a business model rooted in shared ownership, democratic decision making, and community-driven solutions. So for independent workers, this could mean working the way you like while having access to benefits like group health insurance, retirement saving plans, and other shared services at a cost that benefit you, not the system. So as an organization, we've found and identified opportunities where we can work with cooperatives to provide you with access to some of the great benefits they offer. For example, we work with Opolis, which provides payroll-style benefits for independent workers. I urge you to check them out. It's under our health insurance page. Again, you can create an account with Opolis, and it opens you up to great benefits and resources like group health insurance, and because you're enrolled into a system like an employee while doing your work independently, it also gives you access to other benefits like payment verification. You also have access to benefits like workman's comp, and pretty much all those W-2 style benefits that you don't get once you decide to go freelance. Opolis helps provide that. And that partnership is just one example of how cooperatives can provide freelancers with the stability and support they need while allowing you to retain your independence. So today's webinar is a chance to reimagine what's possible for freelancers by harnessing the power of collective action. And I'm really excited to have Jason lead this conversation. And I've personally known him for going on 5 years now, and he's been a friend of the unions longer than that. But he is also, without a doubt, considered a guru on the subject. So that's why I'm excited to have him leading this conversation. So thank you, Jason, for joining us and doing this and lending your time to educate our members on the power of cooperatives.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Rafael. And like Rafael said, we do have a partnership with Opolis. We did have a workshop with them in the past. We do have another one coming up. But this event's not only about Opolis. We're going to be talking about other co-ops as well and everything that they do. And this event is being recorded and will be sent out to everyone later today. So just a little bit more info about our speaker. Jason enjoys the challenge of creatively designing legal and business solutions to persistent social and environmental challenges. He comes to this work with a wide range of experience as an entrepreneur, litigator, activist, organizer, and worker owner. With almost 2 decades of experience as an attorney, his range of expertise and experience brings an innovative approach to solving client issues. He has walked in the shoes of his clients as a social entrepreneur in his own right and on board of nonprofits, co-ops, and other corporations. So we're very happy to have him here with us tonight. Let me see if I can just pin his. There we go. How are you, Jason?
I am very, very well, Jalen. Thanks for having me, and great to see you, Rafael. Thanks for the warm introduction. I'm excited for tonight's discussion.
Cool. So I know I spoke just a little bit about you, but if you can just from yourself tell a little bit more about your experiences and then just more specifically with cooperatives.
So as I was preparing for tonight, I was thinking back to my time in college. And shortly after, as I was getting started, I used to ride the subway in New York and see the Freelancers Union posters up and thought, how cool is this, that there's a collective organization promoting the interests of independent workers. It was so innovative at the time. I actually went to school to study labor studies, labor history, labor economics. And so I like to joke that we studied some passage of Karl Marx in every semester of every class for at least 4 years. And so it was really that ethos, that background that inspired me to reimagine economic structures, reimagine marketplaces that serve people, particularly low, moderate income, working class people. And freelancers are really the original and primary entrepreneurs in our economy. I myself am and have been a freelance worker for much of my life. And so I came to this when I moved from New York City in 2009 to Colorado to become a worker owner myself of an employee-owned solar company. I became their general counsel. And as a lawyer, I stood alongside 44 other worker owners. And together we ran the business and we're together arm in arm through the ups and downs of some pretty major changes in the solar industry. And I was there for 5.5 years until I hung a shingle and started really as a freelance lawyer doing co-op law and what we call kind of alternative solidarity economy law until I kind of grew and built a team and built an organization around that.
Awesome. And can you describe a little bit just how a workers' co-op is different? Like we know it is like members owns, like the people who are producing are the owners as well. Can you, I guess, go over a little bit about, I guess, the legal matters of that? Because when people think that, sometimes thinking like, oh, like that sounds so cool, but how do I set one up?
Yeah. Well, there's a lot of misconceptions. A lot of people identify co-ops as collectives and think about people sitting around in a circle and talking about every mundane aspect of a business, making decisions together that way all the time. And that's not quite how it works. We take for granted that the dominant form of commerce in this country is the investor-owned corporation. That is a business owned by, for shareholders, financial interests that exploit inputs such as labor, work. They exploit other inputs such as machinery and capital, and they spit out profit. Profit is the maxim, is the reason for being of the modern day corporation, and it's been that way for over 100 years. A cooperative, on the other hand, is a legal business structure that's operated for, by, and of its members. So a workers' co-op is a co-op of workers, of people who provide the labor and services of the co-op. That could be a group of engineers getting together to provide engineering services. It could be a group of freelance artists coming together to sell their art. In fact, I'll give examples of this throughout the meeting tonight. So a workers' co-op is a co-op that's owned by its workers, and the profit or surplus, as we call it in co-op world, is generated for the benefit of members. There are no private shareholder interests. There are member interests. And so the co-op is governed by and is operated for the economic benefit of its members and members alone, or members primarily.
Cool. Is there a limit to how big the co-op can be, or can there just be a magic number? No. Okay.
No, co-ops are limitless. In fact, the largest cooperative in the world is a workers' co-op in Mondragon, Spain, in the Basque region in northeast Spain, that has over 80,000 worker owners. It operates as a top 10 EU economic producer in everything from healthcare, education, banking. They operate a university and a major industrial manufacturing division. And they've been around since, I believe it's the 50s. They were formed during the Franco regime as a way to empower an impoverished region. And to this day, they have the highest rate of employment of any region in the country. They've increased their literacy rate tenfold. And they have, as I said, over 80,000 worker owners. Here in the US, we have workers' co-ops that are as small as 3 people to as large as several hundred people. At one time, I represented the largest workers' co-op in Colorado. I think it was the second largest in the country, and it had 1,200 owners. In the Bronx, there's a workers' co-op, the home care co-op, that has over 2,000 worker owners. Wow.
I mean, I'm still just amazed at you said 800,000 for the one in Spain?
80,000.
80,000, sorry. That's a lot of people. I mean, with that many people, how does decision making work? Yeah. Just because part of me feels like that's one of those things where there's too many cooks in the kitchen. So how do you set decision making for the business? Because yes, it's not about profits, but the business still needs to succeed. So how do how do you determine who determines those decisions?
So as I said, co-ops have a really bad reputation for this, and that goes back to a period of significant mismanagement of a lot of food co-ops and a lot of collectives that operated on a consensus or consent basis. Essentially, everybody got together to make every decision of a business. That's not how modern day cooperatives are operated. At the same time, representative governance gets a really bad rap because DC is as dysfunctional as it's ever been. And yet the underlying machinations, the underlying theory of representative government is as functional in business as it is anywhere. In fact, shareholder corporations use representative governance. Shareholders elect directors, directors oversee management, and management carries out the day-to-day affairs of the business. The same is true for cooperatives. So if a cooperative has 50 people or 500 people, the most effective governance system is still a representative form of democracy where the members will get together to make major decisions, major policy decisions, or do we, buy that facility? Do we, shut down the business? Do we sell? Otherwise, they elect a board of directors. That board is responsible for oversight, stewardship, and for overseeing hiring and firing management. And management is the entity that's making most of the day-to-day decisions. So the members are not getting together to choose the coffee at, in the cafeteria. That's a management decision, and governance is about division of decision making. And so there's a lot of talk and a lot of sophisticated tools that go into decision zone charts and ways of allocating authority and decision making that are quite simple and elegant. I have long said that the cooperative form of business is like the Apple of business models. If we can peel away all the programming that we've accumulated over our lifetime here in, at least where I live, in kind of Western society, we get back to a fundamentally collaborative and democratic form of managing affairs. And that's intrinsic to our human nature. And when practiced and with proper skill development, it works quite well.
Cool. Before we do continue, there is a question in the chat just to clarify. Is there a difference between a cooperative and a collective?
A collective is a colloquial term. It's not a legal term of art. A collective is colloquially believed to be a type of cooperative, or really any business, where everybody gets together to make all decisions. It's really just a much more directly engaged form of governance and management. It is not a legal structure. A cooperative, on the other hand, is both a legal structure as well as a set of principles and core values, which I'll come back to, as well as a business model. It's really the original form of social enterprise that goes back over 150 years. If we think of Western civilization, it actually goes back thousands of years when we look at indigenous societies, First Nations, and the co-op model has for decades followed 7 core principles that are that have been adopted in countries around the world that are socially minded, community values, participatory, democratic, transparent, care for community, and they are embedded in the business model as well as embedded in the legal structure. So that's the long answer. A collective is just a form of co-op where everyone is getting together and co-managing the business.
Got it. Cool. I think she just needed the clarification just in case if you use it interchangeably. If I don't know if that's okay or not, but
I don't. I don't use those interchangeably. I think of a collective as more of, like I said, a small scale, highly engaged. I think of cooperatives as scalable, anything from 3 all the way up. And I'm talking more about the legal construct of the cooperative.
Cool. All right. Well, thank you for that. Going back to the topic of decision making, is there, so it is more of a representative type of system when choices are made. I assume, I don't know if it is called elections, maybe it's called something else, but are they held annually, biannually? I assume it's not like our president, which is every 4 years, and we have to live with that. So,
Well, it's it's a hopefully more engaged form of elections. We do call them elections. This is where we take a dry legal document, corporate bylaws. Most people never read them. If any, startup or any operating business has bylaws, they're rarely looked at more than once every few years. Co-op bylaws, on the other hand, look and feel much more like a constitution. They are revisited. In fact, they're often amended pretty regularly, and they relate more to the seasonality of co-op affairs, not to the business affairs, but to the getting together to maybe there's a finance committee that meets and works with the treasurer. Board elections tend to be held every year, but a board doesn't turn over fully every year. We often will recommend staged boards so that there's continuity year over year, and there's some way to transition knowledge and experience from director to director. And so while there's an annual election, often it's a small number of directors that are turning over each year. We often see co-ops do annual meetings for those elections. Many nowadays are doing remote virtual elections, but I have always been an advocate that co-ops should be looking for ways to create community, create engagement. And the annual meeting is it used to be a time when rural communities would get together, bring people from far out, in the hinterland, come together at the Grange Hall, throw a huge dinner, bring a band, everybody got together. They'd have awards, they would do their elections, they'd have their official business of the night, but it was a community gathering. I've been to credit union annual meetings. Those can be kind of dry, not that engaging, but the new generation of co-ops, I think, are really looking for ways of using the co-op to build intentional community and create engagement, particularly when we're so saturated with virtual connection. I think this is a really important way to build real community.
Yeah, that kind of reminds me of, just for a bit of my background, I used to work a little bit for the Woodhaven BID, the Business Improvement District here in New York. And their annual meeting, it kind of sounded like that, where besides being like a recap of like, hey, this is like where the money went this year, this is what's new, they would do a vote of new board members, whether people going, people leaving, if anyone objected. But then they generally did open it to the public too for any residents. And they said, hey, if you want to become a board member as a resident, you can. If you have any grievances, air them out here. Sometimes they would do a dinner. I mean, post-COVID, they didn't do as much, but they still have it in person, which is great because they do want to kind of push that community aspect together. They want people to get out of the house, see people. It is between a mix of business owners, residents, and property owners. But going back to that word collective, it is a collective to try and make the neighborhood better for both businesses, both for residents in the neighborhood, make it safer, things that they can do to make it nicer, whether it's events, other things that they'd like to see improve. So it kind of sounds like that a little bit.
It really is. I'll credit this concept to your founder, Sarah Horowitz. This third sector used to be the place where folks would, not work, not home. This used to be the place for community engagement, whether it was church, union halls, co-ops, whether it was the ag co-op, the credit union, whatever it was. And, we've kind of lost that space in a lot of ways. And now there's a lot of emphasis on building these third spaces, but rarely are they community owned. And I think workers' co-op have a unique opportunity. I mean, this is a place where, outside of the home, work is a huge source of importance and dignity. And it's where we spend the most amount of our time awake. And it's a place where we put so much of our energy and where, there's often precarity and a lack of power. And so in a workers' co-op setting, to be able to use that community and leverage it to build shared prosperity, shared security, shared wealth building, it's enormously powerful to scale up work in that way and to build real community around it. It really does make weathering storms hard. And I can tell some stories about what co-op downturns look like when we get there.
Yeah, for sure. I definitely want to hear more about that. Before we do continue on to that, I am curious. I don't know. I'm just curious a little bit about the whole process when joining, because like you said, it is its own legal entity. I'm just thinking, like compared to members or the co-op sizes where it is like 3 members versus 80,000? Is the process still the same? Like, what's paperwork like? How do you, I don't know, how do you prove to show like, hey, I co-own this company as a co-op member?
Yeah, so the co-op will have, as I said, bylaws that are, really kind of a technical document that pertains to how the elections will work, how accounting will work, how tax will work, how ownership is reflected, whether it's in shares or membership units or something else. A member has to generally meet certain qualifications. Often there's a trial period before, say, a new employee or a new worker is eligible to join a co-op. So a little bit of a kind of courtship period of 6 months or 12 months. There may be some training requirements. There could be some other qualifications. Otherwise, they can join by putting forward a request. Just, I'm eligible and I'm, putting my hat in the ring. And that's often very basic. Sometimes it's automatic. And the paperwork is as simple as a membership agreement. It's usually a very formulaic, basic document that says I meet the qualifications, I agree to buy into the co-op, whatever that buy-in is. And from here out, I agree to abide by the bylaws. Unlike traditional business ownership, member owners don't have traditional equity. So it is quite complicated to prove, for example, when getting a mortgage, I'm an owner of this business. Nobody has a capitalization table showing you as a 5% owner. What they do have, however, is either a chart of internal accounts, what's called internal capital accounts, or the records of you joining the co-op as a member. I tell people this is one of the ways that co-ops operate in the shadows. Federal and state policy generally doesn't recognize co-ops in the same way that other businesses, that they recognize other businesses. So if you go to the bank, for example, and try to open up a bank account for a co-op, there's no box yet that says at Chase Bank, are you an LLC? Are you an S Corp? Are you a C Corp? They don't have a box yet for co-op. We're working on it, but not yet. And so we have to check other. So we are othered right now. And, actively, there are thousands of really devoted advocates and activists working to reform not only policy, but the entire system of commerce to be more accommodating of a business model that's been around for hundreds of years. So you prove it with the membership agreement. And oftentimes we'll have, a letter from the board on letterhead that says, yes, this person is an owner. But what they have is a set of rights in the co-op. They don't have equity. Nobody's a 20% owner, but you have a set of rights. One member, one vote. You get to vote on whatever comes before the members. You get to vote in elections. You can run to be a director, the highest power position in a co-op. You have economic rights, the right to use and contribute to the services of the co-op. You have the right to sell your labor. Another analogy here is, you became freelancers because you didn't want to rent your labor to an employer. So you took control of your destiny and you get to sell your labor. And that's what co-ops do. Co-ops sell your labor for you at scale. And then you have the right to a patronage dividend, which is your share of the surplus that the business generated on your behalf. And your stake in that, your share of that, is based on how much work you performed, whether it's hours or value, but it's not based on how much capital you contributed. It's based on your labor. I say all this because ownership has to be explained in a bit more of a nuanced way to think about what does that mean? Yeah. It's not like a traditional, oh, I own this S Corp or I own 20% of an LLC. It's not quite that simple in co-op world.
Got it. And then you mentioned a little bit about like giving your labor back. Is that something, to me, it would make sense that something always required, like it's something it's almost like your own investment. Like you want the company to do good, you want to give back. Is that always mandatory? And then do you know if there's examples of, I guess, how much you have to give back? Because sometimes people aren't able to. Some people want to like give it back in another way or whatever way they can. Is there anything that comes to your mind?
I'm not aware. And a lot of co-ops aren't, there's no like formal kind of giving requirement in co-ops. Co-ops have this ethos of care for community. A lot of co-ops, aside from being in service of their members, tend to be disproportionately community minded. So you tend to see co-ops choose to operate at a lower profit margin because in addition to being ethical in the way they conduct business vis-a-vis their members, they also are trying to be ethical with how they source products and how, they pay fairly for, maybe it's, so here's an example. Equal Exchange is a workers' co-op in Massachusetts. They're owned by 150 some odd worker owners in the United States, but for 35 years or more, they've opted to pay a premium, a higher price for green bean coffee from the Global South. They're not commanded to do that, but they have chosen to do that each and every year because their ethos and their core values are to drive power and to protect the precarious workers in the Global South. And coffee farmers are some of the most precarious workers on earth, subject to the worst and fastest ills of climate change. That's an example. They don't have to do that. A co-op could easily be Starbucks and pay a broker and pay the lowest going price for green bean coffee. But Equal Exchange has consistently exceeded those prices. And they, in fact, pioneered fair trade back in the 80s. And they did that again electively. That was part of their ethos. But they're not asking individual worker owners to make that sacrifice. They made that as a collective. And so that's another way to think about scaling up impact is by scaling down the individual cost. So each worker owner is contributing, and maybe they're not earning, the same patronage dividend they otherwise would if they were 2-3% more profitable, but they choose to do that because it's a more sustainable way to do business.
Got it. I mean, no, that totally makes sense in the long run, especially like just having that core value reminds me a bit of like how B Corps give back to certain extents with whatever their model is to give back. But yeah, I think doing something like that, you could see so much more social change and some economical change. But that's, I don't know, it's just really interesting just to think about that in the large scale of things.
It's very different from the way we're used to seeing things. Often I see workers' co-ops operate far more generously than their non-co-op counterparts. They tend to be more fiscally conservative. They take less risk, for better or for worse. They tend to grow slower, but they tend to bounce back from economic downturns faster and have lower attrition rates. Now, it's impossible to say that their generosity here or this specific tactic there is attributable to these overall meta trends, but the whole picture suggests that they are operating in a more sustainable way. And we have much larger scale data sets from other countries. Like I said, the Basque region, Italy has nearly 20% of its total private sector workforce employed by cooperatives. And in certain regions, they have upwards of 10% of their GDP produced by workers' co-ops. That is orders of magnitude more co-op production than we have here in the US, but it does show some important milestones that we could be striving for here, both in terms of the social impact, but also the impact on workers. I'll mention another example here. I alluded to this artist co-op of photographers and videographers called Stocks United. I serve on their board. They formed this as a response to Shutterstock and iStock Photo in the late 90s, early 2000s that were growing rapidly and had IPO'd and were investor backed, all on the backs of shrinking royalty rates for independent artists. So when Stocksy started, they said, we're going to do this and flip it on its head, and this is going to be artist owned. And by being artist owned, they have attracted over 1,200 independent freelance artists that form their community, and they are competing with these monopoly stock photo businesses, but they're paying much higher royalty rates to their artists. Many of their artists are able to make a full-time living through the co-op because the co-op does all of the enterprise sales, handles all of the back office, all the technology, has built a state-of-the-art platform and curation system, AI tools, everything to optimize the sale of the artist's works. And as a result, they're able to fetch a much higher price than if they were to sell to, a public or venture-backed technology platform, and it's a way of aggregating scale for their own benefit.
That's amazing. Yeah, because I know like from like Shutterstock and like Getty, it's like 10, not even 10 cents an image if someone like purchases it, which is ridiculous. You think, yeah, you think they would be able to give more things like that, but I'm just curious, kind of just, I mean, you said a lot just right there, so I'm just thinking of little different things of almost a little bit of just the workers, I guess. What's the best way to describe it? I don't know, just talking about just more fulfillment, like people that there's more of an impact, greater impact, whether socially, economically. Do you think that a lot of people will choose to go for the workers co-op just to have more fulfillment, where they feel like they're actually making more of a difference? Because I know with like typical corporations, sometimes you're just a small cog in the bigger machine where it's just like, hey, I don't know if I'm actually making a difference. Do you see that people who are working in co-ops feel more fulfilled trying to help out, what if it's little guy, whoever it is, the underdog, whatever you want to consider them?
Absolutely, absolutely. My former co-op, Namaste Solar, has promoted. They tell stories of generations of their team members and workers who have come through because of the amazing things that their friends and others have told them about working at a co-op. And it's a great example. You know, the solar industry is full of big companies, small companies, Tesla, all the way down to mom and pop solar shops. And the idea that there's a business somewhere in the middle that can be competitive with, but operate with a much more community-minded, sustainable ethos and ethic. Look, work is work at the end of the day, and nobody's saying this is a panacea to make everything we do glamorous, but you can rest assured that everything is done with full open book, full accountability, and full legal recourse to you as an owner. And it's not to say that you have lifetime employment. It's not to say that, poor performance is protected from termination, but it is to say we own this together. We're not doing this in service of some, wealthy aristocrat sitting on the beach drinking Mai Tais off of, the dollars that they're skimming off the top of my work. So there's both elements of it. It is more fulfilling. I say that from personal experience. It is more fulfilling. It's more gratifying. People are much more engaged. They're more bought in. It's no coincidence that also decision-making and power generally gets pushed out to the edges. There's more empowerment. There's more trust. There's better communication. And maybe where there isn't, there's also that underlying belief, look, we're all in this together, and I have rights to go access. I can ask these questions. I can raise my hand at a meeting. I used to go twice a year to these retreats where we would collectively engage in strategic planning, and we'd put the CEO on the hot seat. I mean, we did that every week actually, and no question was too minuscule. He would answer everything we asked. And that was core to how we operate as a co-op. Those things go hand in glove.
That sounds amazing. That sounds like true leadership as well, just on the other perspective things, to always be available, answer the hard questions when you can. Cool. So I definitely want to hit the topic of finances, but before we do, since we're still kind of in the legal mindset, say like if 3 people wanted to start their own co-op, what steps would they need to take to do so?
Yep. So the first is, I generally recommend that folks spend a reasonable bit of time building a business plan. That doesn't have to be a lengthy written document, but it does have to involve some collaborative thought around what are we doing together? How are we going to do it? How are we different? And how are we going to make money as a co-op together? And there are a variety of tools and resources to help with that planning. There's an accelerator called Start.coop. That's an accelerator for new co-ops. My law firm has a free course, a free self-guided course on the website. We call it a community enterprise legal design, and it helps take you through the different modules of planning out a co-op, from finances to legal, and how do you want to do this? How do you want to do that? All self-guided and validated content. Once you kind of have a pretty pretty kind of thoughtful plan about how you want to do things, you hire a lawyer, like somebody like me, and we can get you from start to finish as quickly as you're able to move. It's not a lengthy process. Depending on where you want to do business, we'll probably have to do some work around where to incorporate the co-op and where it will need to be registered to do business. I know many of you are probably calling in from New York. New York has, excitingly, a workers' co-op law, but disappointingly, it is extremely rigid. It's extremely inflexible. It's very challenging. So we tend not to form a lot of co-ops in New York these days. There are other places to form. We've branded Colorado as the Delaware of cooperative law because our law is so easy and flexible, and you can frankly form one yourself for $50 online in 3 minutes. But to make it thoughtful and be able to hit the ground running, you want to have bylaws. So it doesn't take long, but we tend to see an education process. And so it does take 4 to 6 weeks to really walk people through the documents that we create and answer their questions. It can be done very quickly, but it's a more customized endeavor than just forming an LLC. If you all have, single member LLCs, you can do that in your sleep in 5 minutes online. A co-op is a bit more of an intentional community. And so there's more to learn because it's a little bit of a different legal structure.
Got it. And I guess, do you have any recommendations, or because before you're talking about like if you go to the bank, try to get like a mortgage loan, you can't really put co-op, it's an other. Do you have like ways around that, or
Yep.
what would you do?
So a co-op, and now we're getting into the technical details. So I love these questions. And if it's too specific, let me know. A co-op is taxed really primarily in one of two ways. It's either taxed as a corporation operating, quote, on a cooperative basis, or it's taxed as a partnership. A partnership will be treated like a partnership for banking purposes and for tax purposes. And so again, this is one of those things where there's a fair bit of complexity on the front end when you set up the co-op to go either route, and we'll talk you through that. But if it's a partnership, all the members get K1s. And when you go to the bank, you would either say, other co-op partnership, or you could tell them you're a partnership because for their purposes, you operate as a partnership. The corporation is not really a corporation. You will file what's called an 1120C, which is a C Corp-like tax return with a little bit of a difference for operating on a cooperative basis. And I won't go into all the nitty-gritty, but there's this unique 7-part series of the thousands of pages in the tax code from section 1381 to 1388 under what's called subchapter T as in Thomas. So you have heard of S Corps, you've heard of C Corps. Well, there's this thing called a T Corp, and that's a co-op. And it's been in the tax code since the 30s. And a T Corp is its own kind of unique zebra. And I won't go into the details right now, but it's actually a fairly flexible, tax efficient legal structure, tax structure that allows the co-op to avoid tax on some of its income by passing that down to the members.
Got it. So I guess I'm just a little bit curious of passing down like similar, would just what you take away from the cooperative, almost like you're like as a sole proprietor, you're just taxed on whatever you make from the co-op, or is it
Not
kind of like
exactly.
you get W-2s? I'm just curious.
So a partnership style co-op will not have W-2s. The member owners will be K1.
Okay.
They'll file K1s. Again, they can't get W-2 income. So as many of you know, that means you're going to be doing guaranteed payments and other distributions. The corporate style co-op, the worker owners are either, depending on how it's structured, they're either contractors. So Stocks United, all those folks are contractors. Or if you're like Equal Exchange or Namaste Solar, you're a W-2 employee. You're an employee. Day to day, you're getting a wage or salary. What you get as part of your surplus is paid to you under what's called a 1099 PATR. So there's 1099 miscellaneous, there's 1099 div, there's 1099 interest. This is 1099 patronage. And it is a specific form of 1099 income that is unique to cooperatives. That 1099 income is what gets excluded from the co-op's tax return. And it's what the member, pay tax on. But you don't pay tax on it like a partnership. You don't pay estimated taxes on it. You pay taxes on it as a 1099. So here's the benefit. Co-op earns that income in 2024, this year, let's say. It will have to go through and allocate that income in 2025, and it has to pay out 20% of it in 2025. But the member owner doesn't pay tax on that 1099 until they file their taxes in 2026. Oh. So there's a benefit that no other business type gets to enjoy, because if, let's say, you're an S Corp owner, you're paying estimated taxes on all your distributions, and you're paying payroll taxes on all your wages. Partnerships, same thing. This is the only tax structure that allows the company to exclude certain income in year 0, pay a little bit of cash. 20% is the minimum in year 1, and the tax isn't paid until year 2. There's up to an 18-month lag. And so that is a significant benefit. All the while, that 80% that the co-op didn't pay the worker, that doesn't vanish. That goes into what's called an internal capital account. That's the balance sheet accounting of of the monies the co-op essentially is holding on your behalf. And when you leave, co-op pays that out to you.
Is that done purposely, I guess, for growth purposes? Because it sounds okay.
Precisely. That's the benefit to the co-op. It only has to release 20%. That 80%, that cash gets to stay with the co-op. And it stays with the co-op without the co-op paying tax on it. The member has paid the tax. And the reason for the 20% is because that way the member has received 20% in cash and theoretically has cash sufficient to pay tax on the full 1099.
Sorry, I'm just thinking.
That was a lot of detail. That's usually more detail than I go into. So gladly there's a recording and we can replay that over and over again.
For sure. So I guess talking with other things with finances, so what do you do when the co-ops don't do well for the year? Like either finances tank, like I know since you said it's a partnership, generally in partnerships, any losses are on the partners.
Yep. Well, it's a little bit of both. I mean, so I've been a part of, I've been an employee owner of co-ops that have been through challenging times. I've been on the board of several co-ops that have been through challenging times, and I've advised dozens of co-ops through challenging times. What's unique is it's not just one thing that co-ops do differently. First, nobody is surprised by the news that they're struggling. A co-op management is regularly and transparently communicating to the workers, hey, here's what's going on, here's why this is happening, and here's what we're doing about it. So there's a regular flow of information, and here's what you need to know, and also here's what you can be doing to help. So there is a unique form of activation that most traditional businesses don't operate with. They just tell you what you need to know and give you a directive, do this or you're fired. Or they go through layoffs with, no forewarning. Co-ops are transparent by design and by culture. The second thing is co-ops will usually involve more than just management in the contingency planning. So I've been a part of co-ops that looked at every option. We looked at, do we cut all our salaries? We all said, what can we all do? There's 45 owners. What can we do? Can we reduce our salaries? Do we do layoffs? We debated everything out in the open. So it came as no surprise when we made the hard decision, came as no surprise that, okay, this is what we're doing. And it was hard to execute that. Management still had to execute a layoff, but we all were part of that decision and we weren't surprised by it. And yes, co-ops do sometimes dip into those internal capital accounts. Just like in positive years where there's surplus, this is a form of co-ownership, and the best operating, the most successful co-ops are those that try to match and align the upside with the downside, because that's fundamentally what business ownership is about. And you all get that. And it's unhealthy for a co-op to try to insulate its members from downside and offer up all the upside. And so I've seen this done very well, and I've seen it done poorly, but generally co-ops do this fairly well. And, they'll dip into the internal capital accounts. And that way, yes, the co-op will have its own retained earnings. It can dip into, it might have a line of credit, but it can dip into these owner accounts to help, make it whole. And if worse comes to worst, the co-op can do the equivalent of a capital call and say, look, we need cash and we're tapped out on a line of credit and we don't want to dissolve this thing. But we need, essentially 50K. We need it by tomorrow. Can everybody, we need everybody to put in $500. That's theoretically possible, and that's the benefit again of scale. If you've got 2,000 owners, I tell co-ops the cheapest form of capital is revenue. The second cheapest form of capital is your members. And when you've got 2,000 members and you need a certain amount of money, you do the math, it's a lot easier to spread out risk across folks. Now, it's great to spread out the benefits, but also risk spreads out quite nicely when it's done equitably.
This is a good question that just came in about the topic. Can you fundraise as a co-op if you need to do that capital call?
Yes, you absolutely can. Co-ops can raise capital in a variety of manners. We've done this through direct public offerings. You can do this through non-voting preferred stock. You can do it through revenue-based financing or community loans. We've done plenty of crowdfunding. There's many, many models for outside investor fundraising. And under the legal structures that we use, there are even legal structures that will allow a co-op to give limited voting rights to investors, but under no co-op that I've worked with do investors ever get controlling voting rights. The members always get controlling voting rights. They always control the board. But yes, you can raise outside capital. Great question.
Cool. I guess in terms still just finances, is there other strategies that maybe the leaders may implement for growth or say just whatever goals for the co-op is? I mean, we didn't really talk about industries specific things yet, but that's going to come a little bit later. But like what can co-ops do if their goal is either, hey, we need to get more members or we want to actually just spread out in like other locations? What would that look like?
Well, as I said, so co-ops have access to forms of capital that other businesses don't. I mean, what company is raising capital from its employees? I mean, if they're doing that, it's almost definitely illegal or should be scrutinized heavily. But a co-op can legally do it and often does do it. So a lot of workers' co-ops charge a buy-in. I paid $5,000 to become an owner. And with that came all the rights that I talked about. And that capital was returned to me when I left. So a lot of co-ops will access lines of credit, commercial loans, and traditional banking. They will struggle, however, to satisfy personal guarantee requirements. So a bank will look to you. I mean, any credit card that you have, you're secured. You have guaranteed that personally. A co-op doesn't have an owner. It doesn't have, like I said, 5% owners. It has many owners. And so co-ops to this day still struggle to satisfy personal guarantee requirements. There are ways around that. But co-ops are able to access capital from specific types of lenders in the co-op community. There's a whole network, a consortium of capital providers that are lending to workers' co-ops under what's called Seed Commons. It's a national consortium of capital providers. In New York, you have Working World as the local member. You have Cooperative Fund of the Northeast. There's Shared Capital in Minneapolis. They lend specifically to workers' co-ops. The other is something that is new to the US, but it's common in other countries. It's something called an indivisible reserve, which is a form of retained earnings that a co-op could put on its balance sheet that can never be distributed to the members. It's akin to like a nonprofit putting away retained earnings, and it can only ever be transferred to another co-op or to the co-op cause. The reason other countries use that is because in Italy, for example, co-ops don't pay income tax at all. They are exempt because they have this requirement to pay 3% of their surplus to umbrella organizations and because they have indivisible reserve requirements. But it's a way of creating a pool of dedicated capital to use for growth, expansion, and sustainability. The other is, like I said, these holdbacks, these retained earnings, these reserves. So co-ops have multiple different slices of their balance sheet that they can use to amass wealth or build sustainable capital sources as they operate from their operating reserves. Now, co-ops can also invest. I mean, co-ops can invest and they can buy other businesses. So if they've got cash, they can, do what traditional businesses do with the cash.
Interesting. Wow. Didn't really think of anything like that. Because in my head,
I'll tell another
continue.
I'll tell another fun story. So Shared Capital is a financial cooperative based in Minneapolis. They're one of the lenders I was talking about. They've been around for 40 years and they're owned as a cooperative. They lend to workers' co-ops. They gave one of the early loans to Organic Valley. Organic Valley is that dairy cooperative. It's farmer owned. Technically, it's a workers' cooperative, but we call it a producer cooperative. They're now a multi-billion-dollar company operating under the company name Crop, but that's Organic Valley. They've become so big that Crop has turned around and invested in Shared Capital. Ocean Spray is a cooperative of farmers. Again, could call it a workers' co-op. It's a producers co-op. Tillamook Cheese, workers' co-op. Cabot Creamery, dairy co-op. These are forms of workers' co-op, but as they grow, they create the kind of liquidity and capital source that can be used to invest in other businesses.
I did not know that. Because in my head, like if you're a workers' co-op, you can only buy other workers' co-ops. Like I don't know. I just, for whatever reason, I just wouldn't think of that.
Yep.
Cool. Is there any specific industries that you've personally seen do a lot better as a co-op, or ones that tend to not do as better?
Yeah, I tend to see a lot of service-based businesses operate pretty well as co-ops. Service businesses are fundamentally human-centric anyway. They tend to be less capital intensive to start. They tend to benefit disproportionately from shared services like HR, finance, payroll, benefits. And so architecture, freelancer, graphic design, software engineering, coding, law firms, interior design firms, the more capital intensive the endeavor, the more obstacles they face. Equal Exchange has, a multi-million-dollar facility that takes capital to start. Namaste Solar has to buy millions and millions of inventory. That is difficult to start as a co-op. So service-based businesses, a little bit easier. Co-ops don't have to scale up to any magic number to be successful. In fact, what makes co-ops so vibrant and powerful is their interdependence. So having hundreds of thousands of three-person co-ops in some ways would be more of a success story than having 3 co-ops of 5 million people, for example. So co-ops can operate at any scale. It just takes a dedication to shared enterprise and co-ownership. I will also mention, so you all in New York have the Drivers Co-op. That's a workers co-op that owns essentially an upstart competitor to Lyft and Uber. I represented Green Taxi, which was a traditional taxi cab co-op in Denver. In the last couple months, there's been a launch of Drivers Co-op in Denver. It's a worker-owned transportation network company. So that's a technology-backed platform co-op, but it's a workers co-op. It's owned by the drivers. So if you can imagine it, we can cooperatize it. But what I tell folks is co-ops are most successful when they're formed around a community of need, a community that's building a self-help strategy.
That makes totally sense. I mean, have you ever seen people that may want to join the co-op, but maybe they're not as community focused, or
Yes.
I don't know, like to me, it's almost like, I don't want to say corporate culture, but it's kind of like that, where it's like, it just doesn't fit. And then that person just like, oh, this isn't for me.
Yeah, that happens. And that tends to, a lot of these co-ops, that kind of the recruiting and that filters for itself. I tend to see that most in higher levels of management and C-suites. It's hard to hire experienced co-op talent at the CFO level, CEO level. It can be hard to find somebody with the right fit and the right demeanor for more transparent servant leadership. But as time goes on, we're seeing more and more and more people leave the traditional business climate and opt for something a little bit more humane and communitarian, collaborative.
Yeah. Is there any like big mistakes that you would see co-ops make that's just like, it's not necessarily their downfall, but it's just like, oh, this really shouldn't have happened, or I don't know what you're doing, or technically that's not a co-op if you're doing that anymore.
Yeah.
I mean, besides,
I have.
Yeah, continue.
Co-ops,
Sorry.
Co-ops that lose sight of the fact that they're a business. That's number one. I think co-ops will often get a little too involved in their identity as co-ops and can lose sight of the fact that they are still, for better or worse, operating in a capitalistic marketplace, and they have to be competitive businesses. That means they need to make a profit. They need to make a surplus. Now, that's not going to Wall Street. It's not going to hedge funds. It's going back to the workers' pockets. But just like shareholders, members, worker owners have a limited appetite for downturn. And, if management is failing them, you'll see heads turn just like you would in a corporate boardroom. So co-ops need to maintain their eye on the prize of financial stewardship, fiscal responsibility, and frankly, a sustainable business model. They need to have vision, but they need to balance transparency and servant leadership with decisiveness. I also see co-ops that tend to try to operate. Their leaders try to operate by consensus. They try to be friends to everybody. And there's a time and a place to build consensus, and there's a time and a place to make decisive decisions. Layoffs are a great example. Performance management, great example. It brings everyone down to see low performers clock in and clock out day after day, week after week. That can be the downfall. Atrophying morale can be the downfall. So too is a lack of engagement. And I think training and constant engagement, investing in engagement is crucial. Investing in financial literacy, investing in the workforces. I look at, the person who has the least access to this information as the one who is the bellwether for how well a co-op is doing to train its workforce. That should involve personal financial management too, because they're an owner. If they're going to understand a company's profit and loss, they need to also be able to manage a personal profit and loss. These are core investments, core skills that co-ops need to develop. By being a co-op, they've just simply signed on to a higher level of accountability. And that can be a drain, or it can be a major asset depending on how it's leveraged. Those are just some of the initial ones.
Got it. Can you I assume you can exit a co-op? Like, is that a specific type of paperwork you just have to sign off on, or?
No, if an employee is fired, for example, it's almost always an automatic termination from the co-op. But members leave. I changed jobs and I put in my resignation, and the bylaws will specify what the co-op rights are relative to the employment rights. So yes, you're still an employee, but the co-op rights, it took a year plus to fully redeem my internal capital account, for example, but the bylaws specify all of that. And it's all very regimented and straightforward. And the co-op retains a lot of discretion over when and how to distribute cash out of the business so that it doesn't impede the company's financial health. But otherwise, it's all very much set out in the bylaws.
So something that you just said that kind of sparked something in my head, having a difference between members' rights and I guess worker employee rights. Can you work for a co-op but not become a member then?
Yes.
Okay.
Yep. So as I mentioned, if you're a new employee and you're not yet eligible, you're an employee, not a member.
Okay.
There are people who choose not to become members in the co-op. Maybe they're there for the summer, maybe they're there, but they have no interest in co-ownership. Yes. And what co-ops generally do is they actively monitor the ratio of owners to non-owners, because it can be a sign of trouble. It could be a sign that they're losing some morale, some momentum, if they get too large a number of non-member employees.
Yeah, no, that totally makes sense. Cool. So I'm going to ask just one more question before I open up to our members' Q&A, because there's already a couple coming
Great.
in. how do you envision the future of workers co-ops in the broader economy? If you want to get a little political with it, feel free. And are there any trends that you kind of currently see happening?
So I got into this right after the Great Recession. The Great Recession, I think, in many ways was, at least for my generation, the one of those tectonic shifts that reveals how fragile our political economy really is, and really how fragile our real economy is. And I saw and was a part of a massive wave of new co-ops, particularly workers co-ops, starting in 2009. And it was on the basis, is my belief, that that wave would continue to hit ashore unabated through the silver tsunami of baby boomer owned businesses that are looking to sell, that I formed a law firm dedicated to cooperatives and community ownership. I'll borrow a concept from my good friend Nathan Schneider, who writes prolifically about cooperatives. I think we are living through a massive transition, economic transition, to an economic commonwealth, where in the face of political turmoil and oppression, we're going to see these large-scale experiments of economic sovereignty, of self-help, of people organizing. We saw this in the first Trump administration. It was a very busy time for co-ops. It was a very, very busy time for co-ops to seize and create power for themselves, whether it was housing, capital, workers co-ops, whatever it was. We saw widespread experimentation. I saw, ironically, or counterintuitively, I saw a lot of that energy dissipate and atrophy during the Biden years. I don't want to attribute it to anything. I'm not a social scientist, but I believe we're going to see a resurgence of that economic resistance. And I think workers' co-ops are a way to help buffer us from the turmoil of oppression and the fragility of raw, unadulterated capitalism. And we're going to see a form of capitalism that we've all predicted, but this is late stage capitalism with billionaires making policy, and co-ops are really a way of helping to protect the things we care about and build power. And that's why I say self-help is the engine of inspiration, because if we have a need, this is the premise of Freelancers Union. Let's solve that need together. Let's get together and let's solve it at scale, and let's have each other's backs. And what co-ops do is they add in that economic mechanism, to borrow Sarah Horowitz's concept. Let's add in that sustainable engine, that mechanism that builds security for us, builds income and wealth, and also protects this engine for future generations.
Yeah, the whole idea of mutualism, which is
totally
everything just working together. And I totally feel the idea of just self-help, because even for me growing up, like my parents were just very like, yeah, my parents helped me, but it is very much the mindset of you want something done right, do it yourself type of thing. And I do think that with whatever political climate we're going towards, well, whatever will happen, that people are going to start realizing or start feeling like, I'm just going to go my own way, do my own thing. Because like, I think that was part of the reason how I started freelancing. I couldn't find a job because I was in a weird limbo area of too experienced for a junior position and then not experienced for a senior position. So then I was just like, all right, I'm just going to work on my own skills and figure it out myself and do random gigs and design work. So
I can relate to that. Yeah. I used to say when I left a co-op, I believed I was unemployable. And I thought the only thing I can do is essentially freelance. So I hung a shingle as a lawyer and I built something that is kind of me and now of my team, but same ethos. I think a lot of people are inspired to do that. And, again, I think this is the evolution of self-help and shared power.
Yeah, totally agree. Well, with that, that's the end of our main discussion. I'm going to open up to questions from our members. There's some already in the chat. So the first one, going back to your comments on being hard to hire the C-suite skills, is there any training for those who want to learn more of those skills for a co-op model?
Great question. Yes. So there is a co-op management training program put on by St. Mary's College in Nova Scotia They have a wonderful academy, some incredible academics, scholars, and folks in the co-op movement. Co-ops are supported by this whole intermediary sector called technical assistance providers, and there's a network of them around the country. Again, it may come as a surprise. Many of them are funded by the USDA. The USDA is the primary federal agency that supports co-ops in this country. It's a product of It's a product of the policy development in the 30s. That's just where kind of the knowledge base started. It was primarily for agriculture. But there are technical assistance providers all around the country. And many of them contribute to St. Mary's. The technical assistance community is trained by a group called Cooperation Works. They are a TA, technical assistance training program and certifying body. That's another great place to learn skills. It's also a great way to network and pair up, I think, residency. If you have time and the resources to do a residency or shadow some of these, that's a great one. And then there are community-driven support ecosystem players like NICNOC, New York City. I forgot what the whole acronym stands for, but it's essentially a support network for New York City cooperatives. And we have a variety of those around the country that don't directly do technical assistance, but they do support worker owners and co-ops in a lot of different ways. That's a way to gain skill. And then another is to look for positions in workers' co-ops and just start out maybe just from kind of a raw, work standpoint and begin to kind of get your feet wet with the co-op movement that way. But I'll try to summarize all the different groups that I've mentioned here today. And either I or Jalen can send those out. But a dream I have is actually, this is an idea I came up with in the pandemic to put together a job board that would essentially be a workers' co-op for people operating a little bit like a union hall of workers. I wish there were like a jobs board for co-ops.
Someone just asked that.
Yeah, and there kind of is. So actually, one place to go is start.coop. They have now, I don't know, 20 to 25 different alumni, and they regularly post hiring for all of those different co-ops. So start.coop, it's not a job board per se, but it's a way to look. I would look at some listservs. So the U.S. Federation of Workers Co-ops is the national umbrella organization, trade association for workers co-ops. You could contact them. U.S. Federation of Workers Co-ops, start.coop. You could look at the USDA website and find all the technical assistance groups. Yeah.
I'm just thinking, even just based on discussion before, because you said that Denver is essentially the Delaware for co-ops. Are there any other like major cities that are just more, I guess, co-op driven in the States that you can think of?
Yes, I say Colorado's the Delaware of cooperative law because our laws and our filing system is so advanced. It's like, corporations filing in Delaware. We are also fortunate to have a state commission devoted to employee ownership, which is beyond just co-ops. We have a whole office within our Office of Economic Development devoted to employee ownership. We've set the bar for the country, and other states have begun to follow suit. Massachusetts recently restarted their employee ownership commission. California has pushed an initiative similar. Washington State is developing a commission on employee ownership. Co-ops have clusters in some of the big cities that actually stack very nicely on top of where Freelancers Union's members are. New York, Philadelphia, Seattle, LA, San Francisco are the big hubs. Chicago has a really thriving scene. The South has pockets, but the co-op activity in the South has been largely to organize Black farmers. So it's not the kind of typical workers co-ops. These are, again, more ag co-op related. Co-op is coming onto the scene kind of hot and heavy, but we don't have the same cluster concentration that you see in the bigger cities.
Got it. And then what can you advise about multi-stakeholder co-ops versus platform co-ops? And then anything for applying for grants?
Great questions. That also makes me realize the new school also has a whole training program on platform co-ops in New York City under the director, Trevor Schultz. Platform co-ops relate to a co-op that is operating essentially a virtual platform for its services. Multi-stakeholder refers to a co-op that has multiple types of membership, whether it's workers, it could have consumers, it could have different types of workers. So it could have freelancers, and then it could have employees. There was a lot of interest in multi-stakeholder co-ops from about 2015 until 2021 or so. And then we started to see the whole Web3 crypto DAO movement that quickly pulled all the oxygen out of the multi-stakeholder conversation because DAOs were technologically so much more advanced. Now they fizzled, and DAOs, I'm told, are virtually dead. Don't quote me on that. I've been told that. But the success rate for multi-stakeholder co-ops is still quite low. It's very, very early days still, 9 years in, but there are not a lot of success stories. Stocksy United is one of them. They are owned by their founders, their employees in the back office, and their artists. They are one of the success stories, but there aren't, frankly, a lot of long-term success stories of multi-stakeholder co-ops. They are much more complicated to operate in practice. They're a little bit more complicated to set up, but they're just much more complicated to operate in practice. That many more moving parts.
Cool. And then anything about grants? Like, can co-ops apply for grants, or is it very just specific grants that they're eligible for?
Co-ops there's no pipeline of grants from the federal government yet. The grants that come in are through these intermediaries, through the technical assistance providers. They get grants from the federal government, from the USDA, either for rural development or for what they call socially disadvantaged groups. They themselves can make grants, and they often do technical assistance development for free or low cost. Grants otherwise come in through your network and community. I have set up many, many grants from foundations to co-ops. A co-op is not an eligible tax-exempt recipient, but it can receive grants through something called an expenditure responsibility grant. And I have set those up, and lots of nonprofits do it. It's not terribly difficult. They just have more reporting obligations, but nonprofits. So what I tend to tell people is look within your sector. Don't look within the co-op movement first. Look within your sector or your network for the grants, and then you promote the differentiation of being a co-op. But the co-op sector is so underfunded that to compete for a grant as a co-op, it's not yet really it's not yet a thing.
Got it. Well, who knows, the next few years that might change.
Yep.
Hopefully.
Hopefully.
Cool. Do any of our members have any other questions? Feel free, you can type it. And you know what? You can probably come off mute as well if it's a more extensive question. While people are typing or thinking about any last questions, Jason did put in the chat a QR code you can scan or go to his link tree if you have any other questions, or you want to stay connected to Jason and everything he does. Definitely do that if you haven't already. I'm trying to think if I have any further questions. No, I don't think so. This is a lot. It was very educational. My knowledge on co-ops is very surface level, so I definitely learned a lot from this discussion, and hopefully our members learned the same and as much as I did. But
I do have one question if there is time.
Yeah, go ahead.
It's related to the multi-stakeholder co-op because I'm wondering if a multi-stakeholder could operate a nonprofit under its umbrella, and if even a community land trust could be somehow incorporated into that. I'm talking about this because there's a very large parcel of land that's kind of like a sanctuary space, and has multiple buildings and multiple opportunities for like various types of cooperatives?
Thanks for that question, Ren. I love that. I always encourage folks. Your question makes me want to promote the idea of just think creatively about your community and your needs. Community land trusts, yes, lots of examples of community land trusts that that use a cooperative form of ownership. We see that with urban development and communities that are using community land trusts to preserve ownership of buildings in the community and preserve affordability. We're seeing it for commercial real estate development. We see it for housing. If you have a specific project and you want to talk more in detail, you can reach out to me. But it makes me think, I represented a client in the Hudson Valley that set up a co-working space. And it was, again, a multi-stakeholder co-op. It was owned as a co-op, and they basically bought and renovated the building. And it was, again, for and of its users. And it was a need that they had to foster community. The first part of your question, it's somewhat incompatible to have a nonprofit that is owned by or operates under a for-profit umbrella, but it's possible for a co-op to set up what's called a private foundation, which is, wealthy people set up foundations all the time. And a co-op can set up a foundation to do all of its grant making and even to do impact investing activity. But a nonprofit that's tax exempt has certain IRS restrictions on where its money goes and what other kind of expenditures it can make. So how it relates to a for-profit or a co-op is maybe a little bit more of an involved conversation, not necessarily complicated, but just more involved. But as I said earlier, a nonprofit can grant to a co-op.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Jason.
You bet.
Thank you.
I have a question, Jason. I've thought about this a lot. How about Freelancers Union creating a cooperative, where its members can be a part of and be owners, and the union's focused on facilitating work for its members, going out there, finding clients, finding agencies, companies that are looking for talented individuals to create work for them.
I thought you'd never ask. I've been dreaming of that conversation for a long, long time. Yes, some of those instances exist. The U.S. Federation piloted something called the Guild. The Guild is a co-op of freelancers in the DMV, the Delaware, Maryland, Virginia area. And they do more back office work. They support with invoicing and some shared back office services. Again, Opolis is, again, a back office thing, but any forward-facing entity has yet to really achieve that level of scale. Now, at that scale, there are other compliance issues with respect to who's doing the work. And if it's a platform, as we know from Uber and Lyft, there's been policy shifts to classify those platform workers as employees and not contractors. This is actually one of the areas where the employment regulation butts up against and conflicts with the interests of co-ops. Surprisingly, wage and hour laws that protect workers actually inhibit co-ops in a way, because a platform that goes out and markets for work and the freelancer member owners produce the work creates a scenario where in many jurisdictions, those worker owners are employees. Now that may be fine, but that may not be the goal. And so that's something that has to be navigated. But yes, I think given Freelancers Union's reach and community and the knowledge of what the need is, your ability to bring together the right mix of technology and support and services, in my view, is unparalleled.
Great. That's exciting to hear.
Cool. But yeah, any other final questions before we sign off for the evening? This was a great discussion, like I mentioned before. Thank you so much, Jason, for taking time to be part of this fireside chat. Like I said, I learned a lot about co-ops. Hopefully our members did as well. And there was a question about the recording. I will email the recording tomorrow morning, so you will have access to it. Let's make sure I'm missing And can we have a 2.0? This was so good. Maybe we could. Maybe we could have a little bit more in depth of the legal finances of it. Maybe we'll even talk about more specific companies that are co-ops. We'll discuss that. But thank you again, Jason, for taking time out of your day. I don't know if you have any other final words for our members.
I just want to say thank you for having me. I was honored. I've admired the Freelancers Union and all of your work, all the members' work for literally decades. And it's a real honor to get to talk to you about something I love and am passionate about. And count me in if there is a 2.0. But thank you for having me. And hopefully this sparked some ideas and inspiration, creativity.
Awesome. Raph, any last words from you?
No, thank you again, Jason. It's always great being able to get your thoughts on the future of cooperatives and what more we could be doing as an organization to ensure our members have access to all the great resources and information. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you again. Hope everyone has a wonderful night. Take care.